this series of seminars. These are seminars where the main speaker is one of the members of the Evaluation Advisory Panel. And today, with the pleasure, I think with us, Rob van den Berg, the topic is evaluation and sustainable development. So just a few words to introduce the speaker, which probably will only cover a very micro portion of what we should really say about him. But Rob van den Berg is very well known in the evaluation environment. He has been an evaluator for decades. And he started his career, if I remember correctly, in the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then he was chairperson of the OECD DAC network on evaluation group. And he was also the director of Independent Evaluation Office of Jeff for several years. And then since then, he has been very active in the international community. He was president of International Development Evaluation Association. He has also been a scholar working with several universities. And he's also heavily involved in the Wilton Park conferences. Wilton Park is one of a think tank which is part of the Foreign Office of the UK. And he has been working a lot on the nexus of development, sustainable development, and environment and humanity. And I think he has given a lot of contributions to the topic and a lot of food for thought and provoking food for thought. So we're very, in a way, privileged to have him on board today to give the speech. And without much further ado, I will like to give him the floor and thank him again for really being with us today and having prepared this presentation. So we'll also have a chance, of course, to ask a question to him. And it's great that it comes at this time where we, as you know, we are prepared and almost finalized an evaluation manual, but what is presenting to us can also complement the manual and come up with and can be translated into specific question or perhaps checklists and perspectives that we can give to our own evaluation. So welcome, Rob, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And indeed, let me share my screen to allow you to see the presentation that I'm giving you. And I think I succeeded in getting this up to the screen. So in fact, I was asked to discuss systems perspectives and complexity for evaluation. But in order to do that, I need to really tackle the sustainability question. And I've called it the sustainability conundrum, because it seems we as a community of evaluators, but also the world out there, can't really get to the grips with what we mean by sustainability. So the issue of sustainability has shifted over time. If we look at the start of international development after the Second World War, sustainability very much referred to sustainability of development. And it was looked at in an economic way. It was to achieve takeoff for economies that would grow. And this would end up with a kind of a global consumer's paradise. Everybody all over the world would have sufficient food, sufficient stuff for in the house, and so on. And the problem and the issues that arise with this are, of course, overuse of resources and the tragedy of the commons, and we'll come back to that. In international development cooperation, the focus very much turned to sustainability of interventions, but that is something quite different. It actually translates into the continuation of benefits after the end of the intervention. And although it is based on economic growth and social improvements, the micro-macro paradox actually emerged, where you had successful micro interventions with continuation of benefits after the end of the intervention, but not the sustainability of macro level growth. So this led to other problems and difficulties with the concept. And now, or let's say in the past 20, 30 years, maybe 30 years more, the sustainability of humankind is on the table as a third concept, where the actual sustainability goal is a balance between social, economic, and environmental domains. And it should be an adaptive and resilient, dynamic balance. So not really one static situation. And the problem there is that we also know and fully realize that this is not achievable without transformational change. So we need transformational change. Now, if we look at evaluation, the DAC criterion on sustainability dating from 2002 actually focuses on the sustainability of development and the sustainability of interventions. And this third level of the sustainability of humankind is not really part of that criterion. So it's left out. In the revised version, the revised version shifts in the right direction, and it moves towards macro issues. It moves towards including environmental and social domains together in a whole, but it's not completely there. So we'll come back to that later as well. The third way of looking at sustainability has been incorporated mainly in Agenda 2030 that the UN adopted on 15 September, in 25 September 2015. There is a focus on the sustainable development goals. It's in the title. Yet sustainability or sustainable are not defined. If you look through Agenda 2030, you will note that this is apparently completely clear to everybody. And in the preamble, a few things are said about the need for transformative steps, which are urgently needed to shift the world onto a sustainable path. And the three dimensions of sustainable development are mentioned: economic, social, and environmental. And Agenda 2030 is an invitation to transform our world. And again, transform is not defined, but it's in the title. The booklet that the UN published on Agenda 2030 has as its main title, Transforming Our World. So this is fully the third way of looking at sustainability. And if we go to the sustainability crisis that are bothering us, which we are very concerned about as a community, a global community, the best way to introduce this and to basically, I don't need to introduce this to you, you probably all know it, but the planetary boundaries are now in sight. In the past, we used to think we lived in an endless world where as hunter-gatherers, we could just slash and burn and then move on to a new site that was incredibly rich in biodiversity and what have you not. But this overview of the planetary boundaries shows some interesting things. First of all, that we have reached the planetary limits on issues that we consider, well, as maybe secondary importance, like biosphere integrity and the biochemical flows. Whereas climate change, which totally is upfront in the agenda and in the press, is, yeah, well, we just went a little bit over the boundary and presumably it's not that bad. But the reason why climate change is taking all the attention is because the process leading to climate change can't be changed quickly. It's like a train leaving the station, and you can't really do anything to call it back again. So this is why people are very concerned about climate change, and perhaps less so about the others. In any case, these issues are planetary boundary issues that we need to take into account, and IFAD more or less has her field of work in these areas that are quite difficult. So this is also why it's so important for IFAD. Now, how do we tackle this? We have a problem on the economic side, and that is that in economics, there is orthodox economics versus heterodox economics. We've already seen that the development sustainability concept was take off, and that refers to the stages of economic growth of Rostov from 1960. And that is actually a neoliberal agenda with a focus on the market as solution for all issues. And costs, environmental or social costs, are treated in this perspective as externalities. They're not really part of economics. And technology development will act as a deus ex machina to solve crises like climate change. Don't worry, it will all be solved. We'll have new technology. Now, heterodox economics aims to integrate social and environmental issues and supports transformational change. And I'm just quoting Kate Raworth here, but there are other heterodox economics approaches that basically give us a new picture, and they are the ones that will save the day. Well, so sorry, but governments and the private sector continue to follow orthodox advice. And we see this in the media. So the press wants to know whether a GDP is growing or not. This is way more important than whether or not we are surviving climate change, in a way, one could say. So let's then look at this externalities issue that the neoliberal GDP growth perspective can't really grapple with. The nature of public goods. Almost all sustainability crises are tragedies of the common, and I quote Paul Collier here. Climate change is the result of the greatest market failure the world has seen. Biodiversity loss, pollution, and waste. These are all externalities that don't have, that cannot be identified, taxed, or prosecuted, basically. So we need to solve them together. And then there are two categories, social equity and social justice, where there is a bit of a fight over whether these are public goods or not. But in any case, orthodoxy in economics claims that governments should not interfere or not have a role. And it's up to society to deal with this. But it can't because of economics. So we are in a bind there. Now, orthodox economics has claimed that countries need to go through phases of social and environmental degradation in order to grow out of their problems. And there is overwhelming economic science evidence that this is not correct. So I've Amartya Sen, Kate Raworth, you know the lot. And again, the problem is that people don't take this up into government policies. Now, if we look at the externalities issues in markets, and this goes for the markets, the agricultural markets in your client countries as well, you see that money is exchanged between a consumer and a firm for a product, and then there are costs, either benefits or public costs. And governments can deal with this. They just they can regulate a product. So they can, for example, say that a plastics products need to be from degradable plastic and rather than made from a plastic that is not degradable and will pollute the world. Another possibility is to nudge the consumer to change the behavior of the consumer and find ways to have a knowledge campaign or information or indeed nudge regulation. And lastly, taxation. You can also bring the external costs of a product into the price of the product and just tax the market for the costs that are made. So when discussing a market, we are already discussing a system. A market is a system of exchange. So the question comes up, what are systems? A regularly interacting or independent group of items forming a unified whole. And perhaps a car is a good example. By the way, I'm going a bit fast through these slides because I have many to go through, but you will get the presentation so you can go through the details later and ask questions also. A car is a good example of a system, but systems are nested into larger systems. So you see a car joining traffic, and traffic has an infrastructure of roads, and there's a mobility issue at the societal level. From the environmental side, this has been, science has really explored all of this and came up with ecosystem services, identified which ecosystems are predominant in the world and the kinds of services that these systems provide. And you will see if you go into the details here that these include social and cultural and economic issues. So this is a very good way to look at how environmental systems actually interact with human systems. Systems dynamics then have to do with feedback loops. Systems operate with feedback loops, either balancing dynamics, which basically keep the system in place. They don't change the system. I've given some examples of this on the right, where actually these exchanges don't really change the system. The system remains in place. And these are called attractors, actually. And then there are reinforcing dynamics that go in different directions. You can have dynamics in a system that are virtuous. There are dynamics that are vicious. And these virtuous and vicious dynamics basically decide whether the system is transforming. Sometimes these virtuous and vicious dynamics cancel each other out and the system remains the same. But if we are talking about transformational change, we are talking about breaking through the balancing dynamics and creating a new situation in which a new balance will emerge. Now, systems theory and complexity theory are actually very much integrated. Systems theory is the interdisciplinary study of systems in general, but the behavior of systems is thought to be complex rather than linear. They obey power laws. So X is Y to the power of Z. And they are characterized by stick mercy, attractors, emergence, phase transitions, self-organizations, and path dependence. So what we have here is a list of things that can happen without anybody initiating this from the ground up. It happens in the system itself. And this is quite astounding to see happening. But it is necessary to understand this in order to be able to understand how your system that you're trying to influence behaves. And it can help identify changes in systems that for your evaluation. So that brings me to the systems approach in evaluation. First of all, I would like to stress that in identification of the systems that you have to tackle in your evaluation, you need to adopt, to start off with a heuristic approach. So find out what the issues are and which ones are really relevant and which systems are really relevant. Systems are identified initially always through boundaries, actors or components, and relationships. But we also can go to science for more deeper knowledge of the systems that you identify as crucial for your evaluation. And especially also look for the relationship between systems. So whether, for example, an ecosystem is negatively affected by an economic system. So those are issues that are best captured, I think, in a generic theory of change. So rather than to go through a very specific theory of change, I'm an advocate of generic theories of change. And in the Global Environment Facility, I've worked on one that I'm showing here, which was formulated around 2012, I think, or 2011, and got its final format in 2014. And much to my delight, I discovered that the GEF is still following this. So this is a very contemporary generic theory of change. And you can see on the left side, the GEF areas of contribution, which are things to do. And on the right side, you can see the progress toward impact, which basically is broader adoption and it's behavioral change, which will lead to stress reduction. And the stress reduction in turn will lead to an improved environmental status, which is the aim and the goal of the Global Environment Facility. And basically, the right-hand side covers the transformational change that we want to see. So even though in 2011 and 2014, we did not use the word transformational change, this is still a picture of how a donor organization can approach transformational change. What I'm now advocating is that what you do as an organization actually should be pictured in a theory of action. And the left-hand side is this theory of action. It's all the things that you do and that you contribute. And the theory of change, of transformational change, you could even say, is on the right-hand side and can be developed separately. So I think that would bring some clarity to, it would help focus the mind on the things that you're doing versus the things that you're influencing and that you hope to see happening out there in systems. Much of this is also further confirmed and worked on by the Transformational Change Learning Partnership, the TCLP, which is an initiative of the Climate Investment Funds, which has worked together with a very large group of practitioners, researchers, policymakers, and evaluators on dimensions of transformational change, on concepts, on key questions, and on suggestions on how to incorporate this in your evaluation. So I will have the the link to their briefing note, last briefing note, which I think is also very useful to further consider how you could adopt this. And as the Transformational Change Learning Partnership already says, the best way to go forward is to continue with a learning partnership in your evaluations. This is a long tradition in IFAD, and I very much support this and would continue to advise you to continue with a learning partnership in evaluation, because the final aim of sustainability is in the interest of all. So we have joint interests in this regard. Learning happens through sharing knowledge and understanding, as well as turning this into practice. So my proposal would be that you aim for a triple learning loop in the work that you do. And the first learning loop would be, is IFAD doing things right? The second learning loop would be, is IFAD doing the right thing? But the third learning loop is perhaps the most important, and is IFAD contributing to solving the sustainability conundrum together with its partners? And then to turn to the evaluation criteria, apply these with care and ensure your partners agree. I have a slightly different perspective on how these should be grouped than you often see. If you see on the left side, you see the famous logical output overview of input, output, outcome leading to impact, and evaluation questions like efficiency, effectiveness, and relevance as looking at the relationship between input and output, between output and outcome, and between outcome and impact. And there is then an arrow into sustainability, the last one, and showing sustainability as the final aim of all of this. We need to create a world that would be sustainable in the right way. Remember going back to the beginning when I said that sustainability wasn't defined in the Agenda 2030 document. Well, actually ordinary use of the word sustain as defined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary, online dictionary, has both negative and positive aspects of sustain in view. And the negative aspect is very worthy to be very careful about and needs to be kept in mind as well. Badness can also be sustained. Who would wish slavery to be sustained? None of us. Who would wish social inequity to be sustained? None of us, etc., etc. So the negative aspect is not here. The sustainability that we go for is the good one. So there is a teleological aspect on this. We aim for a certain type of sustainability. And that was my, my talk actually. I have a few more minutes to just identify some literature for you that is relevant. A guide to SDG interactions by the International Science Council. They published this just before they changed the name from International Council for Science to International Science Council. So don't let the cover of the study fool you, but it's actually the International Science Council. They looked at how, whether you could treat the SDGs separate from each other. And they said, no, you can't. There are strong linkages between the SDGs. They just traced this for 4 of them and came up with all kinds of conclusions on if you do this, then it will be negative for one of the other SDGs. So very good knowledge that is identified here. And the second report that I would like to ask your attention for is Global Goals Mapping, the Environment-Human Landscape of UN Environment and the University of Sussex together, where positive and negative impacts on environment and humans were looked at. And here they have these positive and negative interrelations in matrices, where you again can see, just like the International Science Council already said, that SDGs influence each other. So number 6 has all kinds of negative influences, which you see on the left side on other SDGs, and on the right side you can see the positive potential as well. And so the issue that we need to look at is that we need to shift from the left to the right. And the document has a huge number of findings that are relevant to us. They are also in the literature list, and I think this concludes my presentation to allow us sufficient time for discussion, Fabrizio. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Rob. I think it was a great presentation and very stimulating. And I think it's one of the most interesting elements, not the only one, was also the systemic approach that you have, and which is something that for many years, one of the, in our perspective of evaluation, we saw that somehow IFAD was struggling to have in its approaches. So trying to see small bits and local intervention, which is important, but really lacking a sense of what is the system where we're trying to intervene, what are the nodes of the system that we have to intervene, how they're going to react, and the sense of actually we need to intervene on a system and not just on parts of it. So that's something that has not been there for many years in IFAD. Then it started to look at its intervention in a more kind of systemic way, although not always in a formalized way. One of them was when it started to introduce interventions perhaps in environment, perhaps was a moment when it did it, but also when it started to work on value chain. It was a great opportunity which IFAD has not always perhaps used to up to the full potential. But this is of course not to criticize IFAD, it's also a matter of tradition, also of way of working of the organization. So I think this is something very, very interesting. And I would like to now give a floor to the colleagues that want to intervene and ask questions. Maybe we can look for some volunteers, but volunteer is a noun, but is also a verb, and it's a transitive verb. So you can volunteer someone. And so using this power as a verb, I can volunteer someone. I was thinking of volunteering Nanti, my colleague Nanti, but I see that he has volunteered himself. So perhaps we can start from him and with this question, and then other colleagues can intervene. I will also have a question later on. Please, Nanti, and then Prashant.
Thank you so much, Rob. I want to first express the deep appreciation of the evaluation team of the thematic evaluation on climate change adaptation, IFAD support, and your contributions, which were solid and greatly enhanced the use of evaluation, hopefully. With that, I also want to make some observations connected to that evaluation findings to what you are saying now. And I echo Fabrizio in finding this extremely refreshing presentation, which offers us a bird's eye view of where we should focus and the system that we are encountering, knowledge systems as well as evaluation systems that need to adapt to a framework that we are not used to so far or not using correctly so far. In that, I do fully agree. Our evaluation also found that we need to focus on the 3 resiliences together. It is not a zero-sum game. It is a non-zero-sum game to talk about climate resilience, environmental resilience, and economic resilience together, rather than by piecemeal and treating one as an externality of the other, and so on and so forth. And your systemic part is also spot on, that we also find that it is interconnected. You can't do it in a piecemeal way. And that is part of the problem that we have, treating development as separate from climate, and climate is external to development and so on. And the need for transformational changes to achieve sustainability is a very important point, and a useful point that you are raising. And that is important whether you are looking at a landscape level or a country level or a global level. You need fundamental changes that go beyond the sector that you are interested in if you want to achieve real sustainability of environment. Having said that, I also find a peculiar observation we encountered when we presented the evaluation to the management and other things. We are an agricultural organization, and we are very much anthropocentric. So in our the spectrum of colors, we have red eliminated and maybe violet focused on extremely. That is, we are looking at, we are blind in many ways to what actually entails in the ecosystems. We are very clear about what is happening to the human system. But when it comes to, so it is more of a more fundamental problem, I see, a cultural problem, where we don't see development interventions as having to have a balance of ecosystems and human systems. We naturally think that they're all based for human system benefits. After all, humans have to eat, survive, have food security, and so on and so forth. That is the first thing that comes to mind. And there are whole arguments about we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough knowledge, and all those things follow. But primarily, there is a blindness. There is a blindness to the needs of having to look at the ecosystem as part of the human systems to understand and develop development strategies. Without this, the problem comes in terms of the refinements, nuances, the depth, commitment, resources, and everything follow this recognition. So this anthropocentrism is a main threat, I see, to meaningfully integrate environmental responses in all our development as well as evaluation interventions. I'll stop there. And I once again want to thank you for this wonderful presentation and your intervention. Over.
Thank you, Nanti. If Rob allows, I would like to collect 3 questions, perhaps, or have 3 speakers, and then we can give back the floor to Rob for any response reaction. So I would like now to ask Prashant to ask a question or make a comment, followed by Owen. Thanks.
Thank you, Fabrizio. I think the question will come at the end, but it's a very brief 1-minute observation that I had, while I was reflecting on the points that Rob made. First of all, Rob, thanks a lot for the presentation. I know it was a bird's eye view of the, the whole transformational change agenda and, the sustainability agenda that we talk of quite often. When you talk about systems change, which I think you did delve on quite extensively, in IFAD, IFAD programs and IFAD staff do claim that they do it or they try to do it in some measure or the other, whatever the sector they're working in, whether that's rural finance, whether there is, natural resource management, whether there's agricultural development, whatever it may be. They say that we try to change the system, macro, meso, micro level. We try to bring about that change. But then, it comes up against the realities of life. It is that, then they say, oh, but, we did aim for it, but then, we came across, resource constraints, we came across capacity constraints, A, B, and C, the list is endless, right? So in such a context, then, when you turn back, and say, oh, well, why don't you partner with others, to bring about these changes, right? Now, here is where, it comes up again, against realities of life, which is that such partnerships carry a huge transaction cost, and evaluation doesn't do any favors to the these kind of paradigms either. Just to give you an example, we had this recent evaluation on collaboration between Rome-based agencies. The evaluation found that the transaction costs of such collaborations can be extremely high, and they might not necessarily always be in a situation to benefit from these complementarities of capacities, if you will. And in fact, a lot of our evaluations often do have recommendations which actually say that why don't you focus on these aspects, let's just say focus on what you do best and don't do those other things. So I don't think evaluations particularly always do much favor to this transformational agenda either, at least in real life, at least from what I have seen. So I just wanted to understand, how do you reconcile the realities of life and the realities of what our evaluations are saying over and over again against what you just mentioned, and where do we stop and where do we start? Thank you.
Oh yeah, I guess I can go for Fabrizio.
I muted myself. Yeah. Thank you very much, and Owen, please.
Okay, no, thank you. And Rob, good to see you. I think we met years ago in Bangkok at an Ideas conference. There was a session there in 2015, I think. But no, thank you. I think this is a great opportunity for us, to kind of step back and take in the bigger picture, of course, in the context in which our evaluations and the EFED programs are taking place. And especially this issue in your final slides on trade-offs, the trade-offs between development objectives, outcomes, and the trade-offs between the SDGs, of course. I'm kind of thinking, how could we look at this? We do, of course, look to some degree, if we have our explicit section in our reports on environment, or natural resource management, and of course, the kind of inherent trade-offs between development outcomes and the environment. But, there are, of course, the much broader than just the ecosystem trade-offs. There are many more. One thought I had, though, just maybe this is more for us in IOE, is we're still struggling, I think, with this coherence criterion, which has come up, more from the OECD DAC side of things. But for me, it could be an interesting thought experiment, to see, well, could we think a bit more about coherence between, development outcomes, not just looking at, partnerships or coherence amongst development partners, but actually, how do these objectives fit into our wider, this story of the trade-offs, let's say. So it was more just a point for reflection there on also how we grapple with this coherence dimension. And I think there could be some scope there. Anyway, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And let's give back the floor to Rob after this first round of comments and questions. So other colleagues want to ask questions, please let me know for the next one. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the comments. Nanti, to go into your point of the blindness actually for other issues that are outside of the scope of purview of the organization or maybe the government. There the issue is well known, actually. We have difficulty in headquarters to identify how the social, economic, and environmental domains hang together. But if you go into a country, it may also still be very divided out. And it may be difficult to overstep these boundaries. But if you go down to the local level and to the community level, you suddenly will see that for people in a local community, these are integrated domains. They are confronted with social issues, they are confronted with economic issues and with environmental issues, and they all hang together. If the environmental issue of, for example, water availability is not solved, then this will hurt their economic and their social lives. So if you think through this concept of a partnership working on a joint effort to transform society and the economy and our interaction with the environment, then the local partnerships are there as well. And the local partnerships can actually give you this additional perspective. And it can also include indigenous perspectives in which the integration of the three domains are very natural, are flowing through this, this worldview of humankind as a part of nature and a part of the environment. So it is just actually another plea for partnership at levels which the board of IFAD probably doesn't have access to. So it's a plea for partnership. Prashant raised the issue of transaction costs and capacity constraints. And yes, there is a general, what I've noted in my career in evaluation is that evaluation teams tend to be very serious about the work that they do and really would want to go through to the last detail. And I've seen this happening when I started in evaluation in the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I noted that evaluations took way too long. There was one particular evaluation that took 5 years to complete. And I started off saying, no, we should do it as quickly as possible and to be completely relevant and at the right moment in time. And this requires especially trade-offs on these transaction costs and on the, and you need, again, with partners, you have transaction costs, but you also have the possibility that the partners solve issues that you can't solve in your own team. So you can draw knowledge and expertise from outside in and bring them in as partners. Owen raised the issue of trade-offs and how to tackle this, especially in the light of coherence. Yeah, I think with coherence, I do not like the approach where coherence is raised as always necessary and always good. Coherence actually came out of the fact that development activities in one domain hurt development activities in another domain, and that hurting should stop. So when the trade-off was not right, that should stop. And a coherent policy was one where the trade-offs were managed and you had the right outcome. But there continue to be in the SDGs quite a number of issues at the country level, not at the global level, but the country level, where you would say not all coherence is necessary. And maybe I'm just giving a slightly easy answer on this then to say that, for example, Switzerland couldn't care less about the rise of the sea level. And the Pacific Islands have no interest in to be coherent on mega cities. There are no mega cities in the Pacific. So basically, coherence should also be sorted out for the issues that are really relevant and which really impact. And you should have, again, a heuristic approach in finding out where your subject really has a coherence issue. And if they say you need to be coherent with everything else that happens, then I'm sorry, but it's simply not possible. So we have to be human in how we operate as evaluators. Thank you. Fabrizio, over to you.
Thank you. I think that Hans Lundgren, who is also a member of Evaluation Advisory Panel, wanted to ask a question. Hans.
Thank you, Fabrizio. And thank you very much, Rob, for an interesting presentation. Normally, I find you very provocative, but today I didn't find that there's very much I can disagree with, actually. So I'm wondering what's happening. Maybe we're both changing. But I think, it's this perspective, of course, not only of humankind sustainability, but perhaps even more importantly of planetary sustainability, actually, with other species will also disappear and are disappearing. We cannot only but agree on the importance of transformative change. So the first point is a lot to agree with. Second point is, but scientific knowledge of systems. Of course, this sounds really good, and the interconnection with other systems or scientific systems. But, you know, how realistic is it that always consider those facts in a single evaluation? Isn't it so that if we're going to do analysis overly, we might end up in paralysis, you know? How can we avoid ending up in paralysis through, and is it reasonable to be able to take all these scientific systems at the same time? You know, these, if we're drowning in complexity in some way, that's what I fear. And where our task is also to simplify things, so we can do an evaluation and people can understand the evaluation and we can react on the evaluation. So that was my question. The third thing, my third point is, you sort of did very quickly away with the private, I don't even heard the word private sector, you know, but having been listening to Glasgow and recently Financial Times conferences, and even been to listening to the CEO of Veolia with 350,000 people employed, they now speak like they are Undersecretary Generals of United Nations. They all have the right SDG language. They're all on board on this, at least formally, officially. There is something changing here, you know. Of course, there is a lot of ESG, greenwashing, and other washing going on, but there is also a tremendous movement happening, actually. You know, companies producing steel without any carbon footprint, like SSAB in Sweden, for instance. You know, there are actually things happening in that sphere that are very important and outside a little bit of what the public actors are saying. So what do you think about that? I didn't hear much from them. I wanted to hear what your view is on that part of the equation. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me see if there's any other colleague who would like to ask questions. In fact, I had some, in part, a question partly overlapping with what Hans has said. The next year, it's more inward looking. It's a very inward looking question. Next year, we will we'll start using a new evaluation manual. And in this manual, we try to, in a way, challenge ourselves. And one of them is to say, make more use of what we call it system thinking. And also, you know, system mapping as tools. Again, the question is, we'll have to do it and see where we do it and how we do it. In a way, it's good to first put the challenge, but then we'll have to do it. And the other one is also, again, being able to navigate, as Hans was saying, complexity, and not to, in a way, sink in making our, in a way, our approach to evaluation over complex. So being able to see the complexity, see the system, and being still able to, in a way, navigate in our construct. So that's one of the challenges in front of us. And I think maybe Rob can have some thoughts about that, because I'm sure that's one of the challenges you had when you also were at Jeff evaluation. Having said this, any other colleague would like to interject question? Indran, would you like to have add any question?
No, I'll wait till the end. It's fascinating listening. Thanks.
Thank you. So perhaps the word goes back to Rob.
Okay, thank you. Well, Hans said it's good to know that there is a lot to agree with between us. And if I've been provocative in the past, it wasn't really directed at you personally. But yes, this is, in a way, it's the rhetoric is well known. The difficulty is getting the rhetoric into actual practice. And this is indeed pointed out in the other questions that were asked. How do you deal with 17 sustainable development goals that all have systematic implications and that are all either coherent or incoherent with what you're doing? And how can you actually then use scientific knowledge from all these different terrains? The answer is actually two ways. It's first of all the heuristic tool that I advised to follow, which is basically exploring issues rather than studying issues. So you shouldn't reinvent the wheel, but basically see who has actually already invented this wheel. What do we already know? In the past, we used to say, if you need to evaluate, you go to a country and you go to the National Bureau of Statistics and you get all the basic data of the country. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that anymore. You need to have all the basic data of the systems, and you will see that you almost immediately get the right information. Let me just give you one example, and this may be actually linked to private sector. When I talk about local communities and rural development, lots and lots of it is private sector. It's not, I didn't mention it specifically, but it's definitely more than just farmers in small farms, smallholders. Let me give an example of India, a tea plantation that is going for a stamp of approval as an eco production that is completely according to all environmental norms. And you have to evaluate this. IFAD could come upon this example. I mean, you basically could have supported tea plantations in India to go for eco verification. And your evaluation team goes into the field and discovers that everything is hunky-dory. But a heuristic in advance, if you go through what is published about tea plantations in India, shows that there's a huge social problem in tea plantations, that there is misuse of laborers, that people are indentured. This is almost akin to modern slavery. And so you identify one other big issue that is playing, and you really don't want to go, your evaluation team, to go there and report back, oh, it's all wonderful and shiny in tea plantations in India. You really have to say, no, this is an issue that we either need to note and need to identify as an important issue, or it's something where we say, we need to study more and we need to actually go into details. The private sector is multifold, and there are some sectors in the private sector that are doing exactly the right thing, but there are also quite a number of parts of the private sector that are actually doing the wrong thing. And while we see in Glasgow what the good side of the private sector, the bad side of the private sector is not coming to Glasgow. And and again, we have to be open to the world and know what we are fighting. So let me end there. Fabrizio, I think I forgot your question.
No, my question was more on practical, on evaluating using complexity without getting lost in complexity. Was more the in a way a follow-up to the question of Hans. How do we control it? How do we control it and navigate it?
Yeah. So basically the same answer. You need to go through this as a heuristic tool, a search tool, to find out what is relevant and what isn't. And you will quickly find that lots of complexity is not really that relevant, but it could be relevant. And so you need to have a first look. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me check one more time if any other colleagues wants to ask questions and they couldn't use the hands up tool in Zoom. And if not, perhaps I can give the floor to Indran for his own reflection.
Yes, thank you very much, Rob. Excellent presentation as always. Well researched and put together, and that resource is extremely useful for IOE as it uses it to reframe and conceptualize its evaluation moving forward with quite an ambitious work plan that actually gets approved next week by the board. So my challenge to those online and the team and also the advisory is please hold us to account when we share with you the draft concept notes and documents to see that the points that you have made and all the members of the advisory have been taken into account. I like your point about, complexity. Yes, you deal with it, but it mustn't lead to inertia. And I also like your point that an evaluation cannot take too long because the horse has bolted. And I think the other point being made about, we also deal in a real politic. So you're not going to get it perfect. We need to have sufficient adequate information to bring about a change. And sometimes evaluators do get actually locked in their own heads and do not understand that something has to get completed. We've got to put it out to get and to provoke the discussion. Is never going to be perfect. But the way you've captured and the entire canvas of areas ranging from the big debates in the Sustainable Development Goals, the SG's announcements, and bringing it together in your various slides was extremely good, very, very useful, resource generated, and the entire team here thanks you. This is our last seminar series with the EAP for this year, and of course next year we'll take up with the other colleagues, and we appreciate your time and an important resource that we're also pushing ahead. We will eventually get it sliced and diced and used for our new website that's coming out so that we can actually share these thoughts globally, because we want to really make this office continue with the very good foundation that has already been laid here, as you know. But thanks for the presentation. Congratulations. I thank you on behalf of all the team and the members that are here and colleagues, and wish you all a very good festive season moving ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bakele.
Thanks. Looking forward to seeing you soon, Rob.
Yeah, looking forward.
I'll give you a call. We'll have to catch up. I've just been so busy, we'll catch up. But thank you so much again. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, Bagela.